You mentioned you have an Edinburgh story about Ed Witten.
Oh, yes. Yes, there was a conference in Edinburgh. And Edinburgh, as you may know, is divided into two. There's a sort of, it looks as though there used to be a river, but it's dried up now. I don't know if there's a trickle in the middle or not. But the one side was where the hotel was, where we were staying, and the other side was where the conference was. And so you had to go along this narrow bridge to go to the other side. And I was not very early, and a bit late getting up in the morning to go to this talk.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I would get up, I would see Ed Witten waiting for me. He wanted to talk to me. So we did walk, and he asked me this question, which was worrying him. He was worrying that the cosmological constant should be negative, because his picture of string, all that stuff required, as far as I know, they still do, I'm not sure, a negative cosmological constant. And I said, no, the evidence is strong. This is positive. You're not going to get away with it being negative. And he was very upset because he wanted me to give him the freedom to have a negative cosmological constant.
He wanted you to give him the freedom.
I think he wanted me to be more open-minded about it. I was just taking the evidence for it. But I don't, it's not much of a story, that one. It's just that he was waiting. Didn't mind being a little late for the lecture if he could try and persuade me to have a negative cosmological constant, which I wasn't prepared to do. Just thought the evidence was pretty strong. I mean, there's an earlier part to that story, which is not Witten. The earlier part of the story was to do with an American cosmologist, an interesting fellow. I've forgotten his. Oh, I should know who he is. Sorry, but he was visiting England, and I think we were going into dinner at one of the college, maybe my college. And as we were going in, it was in the early days when the redshift, which suggested that there was a positive cosmological constant, come along, and I didn't like it. You see, at that time I thought it should be zero. From some idea to do with Twistor theory. And I wanted to I had a solution to what I called the googly problem. And the solution depended on it being null, infinity being null. So I have zero cosmological constant. And that was my idea. And I remember going into dinner, and I said, surely this redshift for these dust could be dust, as some people were saying. And he said, no, that doesn't work. It's not just that. It fits so well with all sorts of things, and they've come together so well if you have a positive cosmological constant. So I changed my mind. I said, okay, I had to get used to the idea. I'm glad I did, because the whole idea of CCC depends on the cosmological constant being positive. Absolutely, you've got to have a space-like infinity. I knew it meant space-like infinity. I mean, that's the work I'd done previously. I knew it meant that, but I didn't want it previously. I tend to visit him sometimes in Princeton. So I went to visit him at one point and had some ideas about Twistor theory I wanted to talk to him about, or something, I can't remember.
Him being Ed Witten?
Ed Witten, yes. No, I wanted to talk to him. It was useful to talk to him. He had interesting ideas. And so I started talking. He talked to me. He said he started to describe something. Blah, 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 blah. And I said, that looks like Twistor theory. And he said, yes, it is. He was using Twistor theory to try and do calculations in quantum gravity or something. And so at the end of that, I said, that sounds very interesting. Now, he said to me, I'm thinking of writing a very short paper, a short note paper on this. Would be prepared to look at it? So I said, yes, sure. I waited 2 months, and then this 100-page paper came. And that 100-page paper, it was 99 pages, I think, but, and I gave it to some of my colleagues and students And then they went discussing this paper, which was bringing Twistor theory in connection with gravitational calculations. And it sort of started off a whole line of thinking in my group. And then we had Ed Witten, we invited him over, and I think he had a combined discussion with all these ideas. I'm not sure it was a good idea, actually, the whole thing, because people had got carried off in a particular direction. I mean, it was probably close to when I retired anyway, so it didn't matter too much to what went on, although I kept up my contact with these people. I think I had a view that it probably was carrying people not quite in. It was an interesting to see how the string ideas that he was having did relate to Twistor ideas. But on the other hand, later on, I think I thought it was not a good idea.
Why not? And also, do you mind explaining the idea? The semblance that you recall?
I'm not sure I can remember it, though. It was trying to bring, I think, string theory ideas into connection with Twistor theory ideas. And it was a kind of set people thinking off and along new directions, which was interesting. Sure. But the thing is, I'm not so convinced about string theory myself. I think I can't remember the details of it because I think I was not really in full. You see, it's a time when I'd retired, I think, and so I was not really, didn't have a group of people who were doing research with me. And they went off on their own and developed certain ideas. I probably shouldn't comment too much because I don't think I understand it well enough.
The Economist covers math, physics, philosophy, and AI in a manner that shows how different countries perceive developments and how they impact markets. They recently published a piece on China's new neutrino detector. They cover extending life via mitochondrial transplants, creating an entirely new field of medicine. But it's also not just science. They analyze culture, they analyze finance, economics, business, international affairs across every region. I'm particularly liking their new insider feature. It was just launched this month. It gives me a front row access to The Economist's internal editorial debates, where senior editors argue through the news with world leaders and policymakers in twice weekly long format shows. Basically, an extremely high-quality podcast. Whether it's scientific innovation or shifting global politics, The Economist provides comprehensive coverage beyond headlines. As a TOE listener, you get a special discount. Head over to economist.com/TOE to subscribe. That's economist.com/TOE for your discount. What about Richard Feynman? I know you've told several Feynman stories.
Oh, I've got several of them, yeah. No, there are about 6 Feynman stories, so I'm not sure.
Is there one that you haven't told much? Or at all, even?
I have to think. There probably is one, yes. I don't know, because I usually tell them all, don't I? Tommy Gold's one. See, I first met Feynman at a conference which was being held in Poland, a bit north of Warsaw. And it was just at a time when the sort of Cold War was starting to thaw a little bit. And they had people from both sides of the Iron Curtain when then was. And so there were some Russians there too. And Poland already was on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So I remember the thing is that my then wife was very keen on getting a Volkswagen, which we bought we picked it up in Wolfsburg, where they made the cars.
Yes.
And we picked it up fresh from the place where they make them. I think we must have left our old one with them. I can't remember the story exactly. I think that was right. It was a new car. And so I remember driving through Checkpoint Charlie and all that sort of thing. It was all behind the Iron Curtain, you see, at that time. But there was a bit of a thaw. And at this conference, Feynman was there. And I actually talked to him a little bit about some ideas I had about doing zigzag, sort of integrals using zigzags for working out the electron field or something. And he seemed to be quite interested in what I was saying. But I don't know how much of an impression that made. But what I do know is that at the end of the conference, there was a group of people were going to a hotel in northern Poland, where the mountainous area apparently, and it was a question of enjoying the mountain scenery and going to this hotel. But this involved a bus trip to the hotel, and you had to get a complete ticket with the bus and the hotel and then the bus coming back. And since I had a car, I didn't want the bus. So I wanted to go to the hotel. And so we tried to find out where the hotel was, and the people refused. They wouldn't tell us. So, no, we don't tell you. And I complained to Feynman about this. They're not going to tell us about it. So he said, I'll find out for you. So anyway, so the day came, we were just about to drive off somewhere. Didn't quite know where at this point. Feynman came up to us and handed a little piece of paper. Opened a little piece of paper, name of the hotel. I don't know how he'd found out, because they were absolutely adamant not to tell us. And the reason they weren't telling, it wasn't anything to do with the Iron Curtain and all that. Well, it was in a sense. But the reason was they were charging everybody twice as much as the official price. And so we got the ordinary price when we went up there. But people who paid for the tour, they would paid twice as much. And that was the reason. And then we drove back, and I think we did to come back through the Iron Curtain or whatever it was called. But that was my first encounter with Feynman, which wasn't much of a story, really. I think the main there was a beautiful set of photographs people took of this conference, and one of the most magnificent of these is Feynman. Picture Feynman and Dirac. And there's Feynman sort of with his hands like this somehow, trying to explain something.
Yes.
And there's Dirac sort of leaning back, rather kind of
reserved.
Yes. And it's a wonderful picture.
Yes, it captures their personalities.
Captures them, absolutely, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Have you ever met Schrodinger?
I very much regretted never meeting Schrodinger, because I used to go quite frequently to the place where Schrodinger went in Ireland. You see, he had an appointment in Ireland at the Institute for Advanced Studies. And I quite frequently went there, but only, unfortunately, after Schrodinger left. The closest I got to Schrodinger was his daughter. One of his daughters, I think, I had a conversation with her, and I met her. And I had two copies of Schrodinger's book, What is Life, or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had two copies, and so she exchanged copies. My copy with his signature on it or something. I can't remember. Yeah. No, I never actually met Schrodinger. The one with my signature and hers. I had Schrodinger's daughter's signature. So I met his daughter. But that was a regret of mine, because I sort of could have met Schrodinger. I would like to have met him very much, because I thought he was a fascinating character. And he wrote, I was a great fan of his writings, because Schrodinger was somebody who wrote popular books, or semi-popular, you might say.
Yes.
And very good ones. And I think I had all his books.
Did that inspire you to write your own books?
I think it did. Probably, yes. I think it was an influence, yes. Sort of think if Schrodinger can do it, well, maybe I can. I don't know.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you're hungry for deeper dives into physics, AI, consciousness, philosophy, along with my personal reflections, you'll find it all on my Substack. Subscribers get first access to new episodes, new posts as well, behind-the-scenes insights, and the chance to be a part of a thriving community of like-minded pilgrimers. By joining, you'll directly be supporting my work and helping keep these conversations at the cutting edge. So click the link on screen here, hit subscribe, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge together. Thank you and enjoy the show. Just so you know, if you're listening, it's CurtJaimungal.org, CurtJaimungal.org.